Hi, Tim Millard here, host of The Extras, and what you're going to see here are different sections from our recent podcast of our special Halloween episode with special guests George Feltenstein from the Warner Archive, Dr. Steve Haberman, and Constantine Nasr, both of who are terrific film historians. And they came on to talk about 3 different films, but I'm going to split those up so that you can watch them in a little smaller bites. In this video, we're going to talk about The Walking Dead. No, not that Walking Dead. The one from 1936, starring Boris Karloff and directed by Michael Curtiz. Well, why don't we just dive into The Walking Dead since you kind of already started that, George, and tell us a little bit about this restoration.
Thankfully, the original negative was well maintained. Most of the pre-49 Warner feature negatives are under the care of the Library of Congress. And we have like a partnership with the Library of Congress where we basically help to support those efforts financially, because that's a lot of maintenance work. And these films were deposited there decades ago. But what they do in terms of their care for nitrate negatives is impeccable. And the same can be said of several other archives in this country as well as in Europe, where there is this fastidious care of nitrate, and they're preserving our cinematic legacy. And to bring in the negative for Walking Dead, I don't think anyone had touched that negative since they had to make print downs for the television sales in 1956. I don't think it had been touched since then. I could be wrong. The Library of Congress might have done something on their own, but happily it was scanned here at Warner Brothers Motion Picture Imaging, and our wonderful artisans in the Color Bay did a fantastic job, not only with the picture at MPI, but also our archival sound team did a beautiful clean up on the audio so that you have full frequency response. You don't feel any high end has been cut off, and you hear the full width and breadth of the soundtrack. And I've always said Warner Brothers soundtracks had a unique studio style. I can't verbalize what that is, but you hear it from the mid-30s all the way up through movies like Bonnie and Clyde. And to see Curtiz once again take up the horror mantle, and Karloff in this film, to me, gives one of his greatest performances. I don't know if you gentlemen agree, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, when did he give a bad performance?
Well, he was even good on The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. So.
Yeah, he was great on that. I mean, that would be the anomaly. If you saw a Boris Karloff performance, you know, wow, he really wasn't into that, was he?
No, he was always wonderful.
Yeah.
And it is always a sadness, because you mentioned Arsenic and Old Lace before.
Yeah.
It's like the heartbreak of all time that he didn't get to recreate that stage role. Raymond Massey's great in the film, but to have Karloff in that film would have been nirvana.
Karloff and shooting Cary Grant with a tranquilizer dart. Those are the two things that needed to happen on the set of Arsenic and Old Lace.
Well, just to be clear for people out there, we're, of course, talking about The Walking Dead from 1936.
Yes, this is not Daryl Dixon and Rick Grimes.
I also worked on.
I was curious. Yeah, I was curious. That's true. Constantine, you have a thread there. But George, this one was directed by Curtiz. He didn't do too many horror films, but of course, he's well known for being able to do any genre. Like, just, he could do it all. But how did he kind of get involved in this?
He was one of those few, not unlike Vincent Minnelli, very different directors, but they could master virtually any genre. And yes, that he directed Mystery of the Wax Museum, Dr. X, and The Walking Dead. That's why we put the great documentary about the greatest director you've never heard of, which we originally created for the Casablanca anniversary back in 2012. That piece is on this disc as well, so that people can understand, if they haven't seen it already, how incredibly versatile and talented Mr. Curtiz was.
Yeah. Maybe one of you guys can dive in a little bit and talk a little bit about this movie in terms of the storyline or the origins. But you mentioned Boris Karloff already. He's a man who comes back from the dead, seeking revenge on the gangsters who framed him for the murder of the judge who first jailed him. How did he become involved?
Well, he had signed a contract.
Oh, he had. Okay, so.
Oh yeah, Warner's went after him. They were trying to develop properties for him, and this seemed like a good fit. They were absolutely right about that. And it's a kind of strange movie because it's part gangster movie, which you would expect from Warner Brothers, and part horror film. But the horror film is very spiritual. It's the whole idea of this movie is that Karloff, after he's been executed and brought back to life, is in touch with some kind of spiritual power that's allowing him to be a force of God. He's becoming an instrument of God's wrath to these people who had framed him for a crime, and in that way, see, Universal didn't do stuff like that. Even when it's a story that has an obvious spiritual quality, like Dracula, for example. They kind of underplayed it. They were more into science fiction. I think they were more comfortable with Frankenstein and the Invisible Man and the Invisible Ray and stuff like that, or just cruelty. But in terms of a spiritual quality, unless it's like done in a somewhat parodic style, like James Whale did it, like in Bride of Frankenstein. It's not in your face like it later will be in the Hammer films of Terence Fisher, but in this film, the very narrative is based on the fact that Karloff becomes an instrument of God's vengeance, and he's aware of it. Karloff is aware of it, the living dead creature that he is, and that makes it very unique.
And there was a commentary already on here, right, Constantine? You can talk a little bit about that one and the other new one you created.
So we put this out. Well, actually, what's interesting is I was thinking about this when everyone's talking. Collectively, many of these films that George has put out had been on DVD before, with the exception of Beast with Five Fingers, right, George?
Beast with Five Fingers came out more recently. Like 2012 or so.
Yeah.
Remastered for DVD only by the Warner Archive. It never had a retail release.
Right. So when all these films were coming out at the height of classic films on disc, we were
you could buy in stores.
Yeah, and they were part of these collections. Legends of Horror, I think that's the one where we had Mad Love and Fu Manchu and Dr. X and Return of Dr. X came out together on that release, and that was 05, I think, 06.
06.
And 06, okay. And that's when we were able to get Steve to do an interview. We went out to, I'm jumping ahead to Return of Dr. X, but meeting Vincent Sherman at the Motion Picture Home. And that was quite a nice afternoon. And then we did The Walking Dead, which is part of this Lugosi Karloff set. So on one hand, it was like Frankenstein 1970 and Walking Dead. And we had gotten, at that time, Greg Mank to do the audio commentary. Greg, of course, is a premier biographer and historian, Karloff and Lugosi biographer. And I mean, you name it, he's written about it. And it's a very, very, very good commentary. And I also, like when George brought this up, I just thought, well, from a Michael Curtiz perspective, there might be more to dig into, because it seems like there's been a Curtiz renaissance. George has mentioned the documentary that was made. George was very gracious in allowing me to do a little documentary a few years ago on the horror films of Michael Curtiz. And there's a lot of Curtiz love going around. So I asked, George approved it, and we went out to Alan K. Rhodey to do an interview. He agreed to do a Curtiz-centric commentary. And then the idea was, how do you save the commentary that Greg Mank made? This is a technical bit, because I think it's important to share that, when we recorded these things many years ago, DVD was not at the same frame rate as a Blu-ray, as a HD master. The sources and the time codes and everything in order for it to sync, it's got to sync exactly. Otherwise, audio's off and people's lips, and it's a mess to watch. So we worked at trying to sync Greg's commentary from nearly 20 years ago to the new master. And what I discovered, and I was like texting George in between each discovery. I think I was annoying him. I'm not sure, but I was realizing that there was like,
state for the record.
It wasn't syncing, because all of a sudden I was finding like an extra frame or two, or an extra shot or two. And so when George is saying that nobody has seen this negative since the 50s, perhaps, I don't know which print the latest version was struck from, but this is a film that may be 15 seconds longer than the version of The Walking Dead that has been seen.
Exactly.
There's more. There's a couple fades. There's a couple lines of dialogue, and I'm sitting there getting very excited, struggling to sink it in. I was like mad at like the hard work I was dealing with, but I'm like very excited, because this is truly an uncut version of the movie.
The extended version.
All right, extended. Yeah.
We have run into this several times, where we're doing new scans off the original negative, and we have an archival commentary that came from a secondary or third or fourth generation element that was missing footage or missing frames, and that's what we've been living with for decades. And then we go back and try to sync the commentary, and it wouldn't always sync. And that's why on some of our discs, we've had to put the commentary with a standard definition version as an extra, which is not ideal. And thankfully, thanks to Constantine's dedication and skill and acumen, he was able to get Greg's commentary to sync despite the extra footage. So bravo, Constantine, as always.
Yes, very good.
Thank you.
It was fun. You're welcome. Thank you.
So just to be clear, this is a extended version. I mean, because of that, by 15 seconds or so.
But that was the most important 15 seconds in the movie, and nobody's seen it for the last 70 years.
It was one of the best musical numbers.
Yes.
Let's see if those eagle-eyed fans can figure out which 15 seconds across the board they are.
George, we should laugh, because of course, anytime you're off by 1 second in any other movie or TV show, people just come out of the weeds to hold you to the. So, I mean, I just want to be clear. Hey, we found extra on this one, and people should. Okay, let's have a clap, here for George. Oh man. Anyway, it's we kid a little bit, but that's really neat, because you're going back to this original nitrate to make this scan. So that's pretty cool. So not only does it look great, and it's a fun film, but you also have the Greg Mank commentary, and you have the new Alan K. Rhodey commentary that is Michael Curtiz centric, so to speak, to bring a new angle to the commentary. So you've got.
What's really terrific about that is they're very different approaches. And although he's not on the microphones with us today, I can say that Greg Mank's commentaries over the years have been treasures, just as Constantine and Steve's are. And I was introduced to Greg by our mutual friend, Tom Weaver. And I think one of the most fortuitous opportunities was when Greg was able to add his commentary to several of our releases, of which we're very proud. And he's delighted that this commentary from almost 20 years ago is having new life. So all the more excitement that makes for a better Blu-ray disc experience.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. We have a couple other videos where we talk horror titles from the month of October. that were released by the Warner Archive. So you can look for those on our YouTube channel. And if you're enjoying our videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That helps us out and lets us know that you're interested. Thanks for listening.